Picture this, a city where the streets ran red with blood during gladiator battles, where rulers lounged in baths filled with donkey milk, and where, yes, you heard that right, people actually used urine as mouthwash. This wasn't some twisted fantasy or a scene from a dystopian novel. This was everyday life in ancient Rome, a civilization so bizarre, so extravagantly strange, that even the wildest Hollywood blockbusters can't quite capture its true weirdness. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on history to reveal 25 of the most shocking, jaw-dropping facts about ancient Rome that you've never heard before. Trust me, by the time we're done, you'll never look at history class the same way again. From emperors who appointed their horses as senators to armies that literally salted the earth of their enemies, Rome was a place where reality often outdid imagination. Think you know everything about togas and colosseums? Think again. Beneath the marble statues and grand arches lay a world of absurd rituals, grotesque luxuries, and downright mind-bending customs. Why did Romans believe eating flamingo tongues brought good luck? How did a single volcanic eruption lead to a city-wide riot over bread? And what in the world possessed them to use crushed mouse brains as toothpaste? The answers will leave you equal parts horrified and fascinated. This isn't just a trip through the history books, it's a plunge into the chaotic, outrageous, and utterly unpredictable heart of an empire that shaped the modern world. Whether you're a history buff or just someone who loves a good "wait, that actually happened" moment, these facts will make you see ancient Rome in a whole new light. So grab a seat, maybe skip the snack for this one, and get ready to uncover the secrets of a civilization that was equal parts brilliant and downright bonkers. The truth is stranger than fiction, and Rome, well, Rome was in a league of its own. If you thought modern dentistry was strange, wait until you hear what the Romans considered cutting-edge oral hygiene. Believe it or not, urine wasn't just waste in ancient Rome. It was a prized ingredient for keeping smiles bright. Public toilets across the empire doubled as collection points, where vats gathered ammonia-rich urine from citizens, which was then sold to laundries and, yes, even dentists. The ammonia acted as a natural bleaching agent, making it the go-to teeth-whitening treatment of the day. But this wasn't some underground practice, it was completely normalized, even lucrative. Emperor Vespasian famously imposed a urine tax, turning bodily waste into a state-sanctioned revenue stream. When his son Titus complained about the unsavory source of the money, Vespasian reportedly held up a gold coin and quipped, "Money doesn't smell." And the Romans took this so seriously that entire industries sprang up around urine distribution, with merchants shipping amphorae of the stuff to meet demand. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of luxury toothpaste, except instead of minty freshness, you got, well, the unmistakable tang of ammonia. What's even wilder? Some wealthier Romans insisted on imported urine, believing certain regions produced superior quality for their pearly whites. So the next time you wince at the taste of fluoride, just be grateful your dentist isn't handing you a cup of yesterday's chamber pot. Gladiators were the rock stars of ancient Rome, battling for glory in the arena. But their secret weapon wasn't just rigorous training or a flashy sword. It was something far stranger: ash smoothies. That's right, these fighters guzzled tonics made from charred plants or even animal bones, believing the concoction would supercharge their strength and speed up recovery. Modern research suggests they might have been onto something. The ash, rich in calcium and other minerals, likely helped repair bones and muscles after brutal fights, acting as an ancient version of today's protein shakes or electrolyte drinks. Archaeologists have found traces of these drinks in gladiator graves, with bone fragments ground into powder and mixed into their food and beverages. It wasn't exactly gourmet. Imagine chugging a gritty, smoky slurry before a fight, but for warriors who faced fractures and fatigue as part of the job, it was worth the foul taste. Even the legendary physician Galen recommended ash tonics, prescribing them to heal wounds and restore vigor. What's fascinating is how close they came to modern science. Calcium is crucial for bone density, something athletes still prioritize today. The gladiators just got theirs in the most hardcore way possible, by drinking the literal remains of fire. Talk about a performance enhancer. Next time you see a gym goer sipping a protein shake, remember, the ancient world had its own version, and it was far less appetizing. Emperor Caligula took the phrase horsepower to an entirely new level by giving his favorite stallion, Incitatus, a seat in the Roman Senate. This wasn't just some passing eccentricity or a quirky pet project. Caligula went all in, outfitting the horse with an ivory manger, a marble stable, and even a team of servants to ensure it lived like nobility. The emperor reportedly planned to make Incitatus a full consul, the highest political office in Rome, before his untimely assassination. But was this sheer madness or a calculated middle finger to the elite? Some historians argue it was pure delusion. Caligula had a reputation for erratic behavior, from declaring war on the sea to demanding worship as a living god. Others see it as a vicious satire. The Senate was notoriously corrupt, filled with backstabbing aristocrats Caligula despised. What better way to expose their incompetence than by promoting an animal that, frankly, might have been more dignified than some of his human advisors? There's even a darker theory that the move was psychological warfare designed to humiliate senators into submission. After all, if a horse could outrank them, how much power did they really have? Incitatus wasn't just a pet, he was a political statement. And whether it was insanity or genius, one thing's certain: no other leader in history has ever trolled their government quite like Caligula. The punchline: some accounts suggest the horse actually attended Senate meetings, though whether it voted on legislation remains one of history's great unanswered questions. Either way, Rome's elite got the message. Under Caligula, even livestock had more sway than they did. Romans turned snacking into an art form, and nothing proves that quite like their obsession with stuffed dormice. These tiny rodents weren't just a casual dish, they were a luxury item, carefully fattened in specially designed pottery jars called gladiators. Picture a miniature farm where dormice lived in the dark, gorging themselves on nuts and acorns until they were plump enough to be roasted, stuffed with minced pork, pine nuts, and honey, then served as the ultimate party food. The recipe even made it into Apicius' famous cookbook, a kind of ancient Roman mastering the art of French cooking, where it's described as a dish fit for the wealthiest feasts. But why dormice? For starters, they were easy to farm in captivity, and their rich, fatty meat was considered a delicacy, especially when paired with sweet and savory fillings. The gladiator jars had tiny ledges inside, encouraging the mice to run in circles, an early version of forced exercise to keep their meat tender. Some wealthy households even had dedicated mouse keepers to oversee production. And if you're imagining a modern equivalent, think of it like gourmet Kobe beef, but with rodents. The dish was so prized that laws were passed to prevent overserving at banquets, a move meant to curb extravagance, though it clearly didn't stop Caligula, who reportedly served hundreds at a single dinner. What's wild is that this wasn't some fleeting trend. Dormice remained on elite menus for centuries, their preparation refined into an exact science. So the next time you see a cheese plate at a fancy gathering, just remember, it could have been worse. You could have been handed a honey-glazed dormouse on a silver platter. If you think scrolling through your phone was the ultimate bathroom stall activity, the Romans would have put you to shame. Their public toilets weren't just places to answer nature's call. They were bustling social hubs where business deals were struck, gossip was exchanged, and even political alliances were forged. Picture rows of stone seats with holes, lined up side by side like some bizarre open-plan office, where nobody batted an eye at the lack of privacy. In fact, the more crowded the latrine, the better. For Romans, this was the equivalent of a coffee shop meetup or a modern-day networking event, just with far fewer boundaries. What really takes this from quirky to outright shocking is the cleaning method. Forget toilet paper. Romans relied on a communal sponge on a stick known as a tersorium. After use, you dip it into a bucket of salt water or vinegar and, well, let's just say hygiene standards weren't exactly what we'd call sterile. What's worse, that same sponge was passed around to everyone. If the thought of sharing a single sponge makes you cringe, imagine the infections floating around those spaces. Archaeologists have found evidence of parasites like whipworms and roundworms in ancient Roman sewers, proof that this system wasn't just unhygienic, it was a public health disaster waiting to happen. But the dangers didn't stop there. Beneath these toilets ran intricate sewer systems which, while advanced for their time, had a deadly flaw: methane buildup. With all that waste decomposing underground, the gases could ignite explosively if a stray torch or lamp got too close. There are records of entire latrines being blown apart mid-use, turning a casual bathroom break into a life-or-death situation. And yet, Romans kept flocking to them. Why? Because these spaces were more than functional. They were a cornerstone of social life. To skip the public latrine was to miss out on the latest news, the juiciest scandals, or even a chance to schmooze with a senator. So next time you complain about a crowded restroom, be grateful you're not dodging explosions while negotiating a business deal or sharing a sponge with half your neighborhood. In a world obsessed with fast fashion, the Romans took luxury to an almost unimaginable extreme, with a color so rare, so painstaking to produce, that wearing it could land you in serious trouble unless you were the emperor. Tyrian purple wasn't just a hue, it was a status symbol drenched in literal snail guts. The process began with thousands of murex sea snails harvested from the Mediterranean's depths. Each one had to be cracked open to extract a tiny gland secreting a mucus-like fluid. But here's the catch: this liquid wasn't purple at all. It started as a sickly yellow. Only after days of simmering in vats of putrid brine, exposed to sunlight, would it transform into that iconic deep violet. And the smell? Imagine rotting seafood mixed with sulfur, so foul that dye workshops were often banished to the outskirts of cities. The numbers alone are staggering. To produce just 1 gram of pure Tyrian purple, enough to dye the trim of a single toga, workers needed to slaughter around 10,000 snails. That's entire beaches worth of shells, all for a few drops of dye. No wonder the color became synonymous with power. Emperors flaunted it in their robes, senators edged their garments with it, and woe betide anyone caught wearing too much of it without permission. There were even strict sumptuary laws dictating who could wear purple and how much. Violators risked fines, exile, or worse. But why go to such lengths? Because this wasn't just about aesthetics. Purple carried divine weight. The Phoenicians, who first mastered the technique, linked it to their gods, and the Romans adopted that mystique. When Julius Caesar returned triumphant to Rome, he didn't just wave to the crowds. He draped himself in solid Tyrian purple, a flex so audacious it screamed, "I am closer to a god than a man." Cleopatra, never one to be outdone, had the sails of her royal ship dipped in the dye, turning the very wind into a billowing statement of wealth as she sailed to meet Mark Antony. What's fascinating is how modern science has unlocked the secret behind the snail's magic. The dye contains bromine compounds, making it fade-resistant, unlike vegetable-based purples that dulled over time. In sunlight, Tyrian purple didn't weaken, it intensified, almost glowing. That's why, centuries later, fragments of Roman textiles still retain their regal shimmer. Today, you can find synthetic purples on every clothing rack, but none carry the same aura of power. After all, how many colors have sparked wars, inspired laws, and defined empires? Tyrian purple wasn't just a color, it was a revolution in a vat. Even in the dead of night, Rome's mills never slept, and neither, it seemed, did the spirits that powered them. Workers whispered of molar spirits, restless ghosts bound to the grinding stones, their presence announced by the unearthly groans of turning wheels and the ghostly clatter of grain. These weren't just campfire tales, they were deeply held beliefs so widespread that even Pliny the Elder wrote of haunted mills where unseen hands did the work of the living. But the truth behind the legend, a chilling blend of sleep deprivation, industrial noise, and a dash of Roman ingenuity. Picture a mill after dark, the rhythmic creak of wooden gears, the echoing screech of stone grinding against stone, shadows stretching like specters across the walls. With no electric lighting, workers relied on flickering torches, casting eerie, shifting shapes that tricked tired eyes into seeing movement where there was none. The flour dust hanging in the air didn't help, it clung like mist, swirling in phantom currents. And then there were the rats, swarms of them, darting through the machinery, their squeaks and scratches blending into the cacophony. It's no wonder exhausted laborers began attributing the chaos to something supernatural. But the molar myth had a practical edge too. Mill work was grueling, often forced upon enslaved people or prisoners. Supervisors, eager to keep productivity up, may have encouraged the ghost stories to deter theft or laziness. After all, who'd risk stealing grain if they believed vengeful spirits guarded it? Some mills even placed offerings, bread or wine, near the grindstones to appease the molar, turning superstition into a makeshift security system, the most fascinating twist. Modern archaeologists have found mill sites littered with carved curse tablets, tiny lead sheets inscribed with pleas to the spirits. One discovered in France reads, "To the ghosts of this mill, I give the thief who stole my flour. Let his hands wither." It's a stark reminder that for Romans, the line between the living and the dead wasn't just blurred. It was ground into the very flour that fed their empire. So the next time you hear an old house creak at night, remember, 2,000 years ago, someone might have blamed it on a ghost just trying to earn its keep. Roman women desperate for golden locks didn't reach for a bottle of modern bleach. They reached for something far more shocking: pigeon dung. That's right, one of the most sought-after hair dyes in ancient Rome was a paste made from fermented pigeon droppings, carefully collected and mixed with ashes or vinegar to create a lightening effect. The ammonia in the excrement acted as a chemical bleach, stripping away pigment strand by strand, though the stench must have been unbearable. Wealthy matrons even employed special servants called cosmeti to handle the pungent process, applying the mixture with delicate brushes while holding perfumed cloths to their noses. But why go to such extremes? Blonde hair was a status symbol, associated with captured Germanic slaves and the exotic allure of northern tribes. Dark-haired Roman women coveted the look so fiercely they were willing to endure literally crappy beauty treatments to achieve it. The pigeon poop trend was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to risky Roman cosmetics. Take their obsession with lead-based makeup. A popular face cream called cerasa, made by mixing lead and vinegar, promised porcelain-perfect skin, smoothing wrinkles and masking blemishes. What it actually did was slowly poison the wearer, causing everything from kidney failure to madness. Emperor Nero's wife, Poppaea, allegedly bathed in donkey milk to counteract the damage, but even that couldn't save her from lead's ravages. Then there was sulfur orpiment, a vibrant yellow arsenic powder used as eyeshadow. A single misapplied swipe could lead to nausea, hair loss, or worse. What's wild is that Romans knew these concoctions were dangerous. Physicians like Galen warned against lead's toxicity, and there are accounts of women fainting from the fumes of their own makeup. Yet the demand never wavered. Why? Because beauty standards were entwined with social power. Pale skin signaled you didn't labor outdoors, and elaborate hairstyles, often woven with expensive imported hairpieces, advertised wealth. Even the pigeon dung dye had its own hierarchy. The most exclusive version supposedly came from prized temple pigeons, whose droppings were considered purer. The irony, some of these toxic trends echo eerily in today's beauty industry. modern hair dyes still use ammonia, and skin lightening creams sometimes contain mercury. The Romans just took it to extremes we'd now call reckless. So next time you complain about a bad haircut, remember, at least your stylist isn't arm deep in a bucket of fermented bird waste. The Colosseum wasn't just a stage for gladiators and wild beasts. It could transform into an artificial ocean, hosting full-scale naval battles with real warships and hundreds of combatants. This spectacle, known as Naumatia, required engineering so advanced it would impress modern architects. Beneath the arena's wooden floor lay a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers called the hypogeum, but what few realize is that it also functioned as a colossal plumbing system. Workers would divert water from the Aqua Claudia aqueduct through hidden channels, flooding the entire floor to a depth of 5 feet in a matter of hours. Imagine the roar of the crowd as triremes, actual ships crewed by prisoners of war or condemned criminals, clashed in the heart of Rome, oars splashing, sails ripping, and men fighting for their lives. The logistics were mind-boggling. Each battle required draining and refilling millions of gallons of water, a process that took days and demanded precision. Too slow and the spectacle lost its impact. Too fast and the hydraulic pressure could crack the arena's foundations. Emperor Titus debuted this feat in 80 AD, commemorating the opening of the Colosseum with a reenactment of the Battle of Syracuse, complete with sinking ships and drowning soldiers. The crowd went wild, but behind the scenes the effort was Herculean. Salt water corroded the infrastructure, the stench of stagnant water mixed with blood turned unbearable, and the risk of disease skyrocketed. So why did Rome abandon such a crowd-pleasing spectacle? Simple, it was a nightmare to maintain. After just a few decades, the hypogeum's intricate mechanisms began failing. The wooden supports rotted, the tunnels clogged with debris, and the costs spiraled out of control. By the reign of Domitian, the Colosseum's naval battles were relegated to history, replaced by quicker, cheaper bloodsport. But the ambition behind them speaks volumes. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a flex of imperial power, a way to shout, "We don't just conquer nature, we recreate it for fun." Today, the hypogeum's remnants still hint at its dual purpose, with grooves in the stone that once guided water instead of gladiators. Next time you see the Colosseum, picture it not as a ruin, but as a stage where Rome turned its greatest military triumphs into live-action theater, before the sheer audacity of the idea sank under its own weight. Even the filthiest corners of Rome had divine protection. Enter Closina, the goddess who reigned over the Cloaca Maxima, the empire's sprawling sewer system. Far from being a minor deity, she was worshipped by citizens and elites alike. Her shrines nestled near the very drains she safeguarded. But this wasn't just superstition, it was a survival strategy. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just a sewer, it was a marvel of engineering, a network of tunnels so vital that its failure could mean disease, floods, or even political unrest. Romans believed Closina's favor kept the city from literally drowning in its own waste, and they weren't wrong. Rituals honoring Closina were as practical as they were spiritual. Every spring, priests would lead processions to the sewer's entrance, offering sacrifices of flowers, incense, and even precious coins, a bribe to the goddess to prevent blockages. Workers who ventured into the tunnels carried amulets stamped with her likeness, trusting her to shield them from poisonous gases and collapsing passageways. The irony, some of these amulets have been found in the sewers, lost by those who perhaps needed her protection a bit too urgently. But Closina's influence stretched beyond the underground. She doubled as a goddess of marriage and purity, a bizarre combo until you consider the Cloaca Maxima's symbolic role. Just as it carried away the city's filth, it also represented Rome's ability to cleanse itself of moral decay, political corruption, even bad luck. Emperors like Augustus restored her temples not just for civic pride, but to signal they were cleaning up the empire. There's even evidence that newlywed couples would leave offerings to her, praying for a union as unshakable as the stone arches beneath their feet. The genius of Clocinus' cult lies in its pragmatism. Romans didn't just pray for divine intervention, they paired it with relentless maintenance. Teams of Clocarii state-funded sewer workers patrolled the tunnels daily, clearing debris with hooks and dredging boats. When Pliny the Elder praised the Cloaca Maxima as Rome's greatest achievement, he wasn't exaggerating. This was a system so advanced that parts of it still function today, over 2,000 years later. So next time you flush without a second thought, spare a moment for Clocina. She might be the only deity in history who turned raw sewage into a testament of human ingenuity and got worshipped for it. Julius Caesar's funeral wasn't just a somber farewell. It turned into a riot that nearly incinerated the heart of Rome itself. As his body lay on a pyre in the Forum, draped in his blood-stained toga, the crowd's grief quickly spiraled into frenzy. Mourners ripped benches from nearby shops and hurled them onto the flames, along with jewelry, weapons, even their own clothing, fueling a fire so intense it leaped beyond control. Within hours, the entire Forum was ablaze, its temples and statues melting under the heat of a city's collective rage and devotion. But this wasn't just chaos, it was a calculated explosion of political theater. The riot revealed something startling. Romans didn't just mourn Caesar as a leader, they worshipped him as a god. Antony's infamous speech, brandishing Caesar's torn robe and listing his wounds, didn't just stir emotions, it weaponized them. The crowd wasn't merely grieving, they were enacting a sacred rite, treating the pyre like an altar. By throwing their possessions into the flames, they weren't just honoring Caesar, they were sending offerings to the divine. The Senate had already declared him Divus, a god of the Roman state, but the people made it real with fire and fury. The symbolism was inescapable. The Forum, Rome's political nucleus, burning in the shape of Caesar's legacy. Even the flames were political. As the crowd chanted, "You are avenged," for his murder, they weren't just addressing Caesar. They were speaking to his heir, Octavian, who'd soon weaponize that deification to seize power. The ashes of the Forum didn't just mark the end of a man, they kindled the birth of an empire. Archaeologists have found traces of this inferno centuries later: scorched marble, warped metal, even remnants of those thrown offerings fused into the stone. What started as a funeral ended as a revolution, proving that in Rome, even death could be a spectacle and a spark. The Colosseum's brutal spectacles weren't just about bloodshed. They came with an unexpected luxury, a massive retractable shade system so advanced it put some modern stadiums to shame. Known as the velarium, this canopy wasn't just a flimsy top but a precision-engineered marvel, operated by an army of sailors from the Imperial Navy. Picture a 100-foot-tall umbrella, its fabric sails stretched taut across 80,000 seats, shielding spectators from Rome's relentless sun while allowing just enough breeze to keep the air from stagnating. The framework, a network of ropes and pulleys anchored to stone corbels still visible today, their grooves worn smooth by centuries of use. What made the velarium truly revolutionary was its workforce. The sailors, experts in handling rigging and sails, were the only ones with the skills to manage such a colossal structure. Teams would synchronize their movements like a well-oiled machine, adjusting the canopy's tension as the sun shifted. Think of it as ancient climate control. And unlike modern retractable roofs which rely on steel and hydraulics, the velarium was all muscle and ingenuity. The fabric itself was a technological feat, likely made from linen treated with animal fat or lime to repel rain and resist tearing. The closest modern equivalent might be the roof of Wimbledon's centre court, but even that pales in comparison. The Colosseum's system covered nearly 6 acres without a single internal support beam, a free-spanning design engineers still admire. And while today's stadiums use motors and sensors, the Romans relied on shouted commands and sheer manpower, proving luxury didn't always mean high tech. The velarium wasn't just practical, it was a power play. When the sails unfurled with military precision, it reminded everyone that Rome could bend even the elements to its will. So next time you complain about a stadium's obstructed view, remember, 2,000 years ago, an empire with no electricity gave 80,000 people shade on demand and made it look effortless. Long before tomatoes graced Italian pasta sauces, the Romans regarded them with deep suspicion, if they'd even encountered them at all. Here's the twist: tomatoes didn't reach Europe until after the fall of Rome, but the myth that ancient Romans feared them as wolf peaches persists, blending later medieval fears with their very real phobias about mysterious foods. The term Lycopersicum, meaning wolf peach, actually comes from Renaissance botanists who wrongly linked the fruit to deadly nightshade, a plant infamous for its toxicity. But while the tomato panic is misplaced chronologically, the paranoia behind it pure Roman. The empire had a long history of distrusting foreign foods, especially those with unfamiliar appearances. Take the eggplant, for example. When it first arrived from India, many refused to eat it, convinced its glossy purple skin hid poison. Even potatoes, once introduced, were initially grown as ornamentals because peasants feared they'd cause leprosy. Romans approached new ingredients like culinary detectives, subjecting them to bizarre tests. Pliny the Elder wrote about the peacock test, where suspicious foods were fed to the birds. If they survived, the dish was deemed safe. Other methods included rubbing strange plants on open wounds. If inflammation followed, the food was banished. But the most revealing part: this wasn't just superstition, it was strategy. Rome's elites weaponized food fears to control the masses. When Claudius's wife, Agrippina, wanted to discredit a rival, she allegedly spread rumors that his exotic mushrooms were toxic. Emperors like Domitian hosted feasts where guests hesitated to eat, never sure if their plates held delicacies or deadly traps. In a world without food safety regulations, every bite carried risk, and rumors spread faster than spoiled meat. The irony: some actually toxic foods slipped through because they looked harmless. Romans loved silphium, a herb so popular it was harvested to extinction, despite its contraceptive properties and likely lethal doses in large quantities. Meanwhile, they avoided garlic before temple visits, fearing its scent offended gods, yet gulped down wine sweetened with lead. Their logic: if it didn't kill you immediately, it must be fine. So while the tomato tale is a historical mix-up, the mindset was textbook Rome, a blend of curiosity, caution, and outright contradiction. Next time you sprinkle basil on a margherita pizza, remember, it took centuries for Europe to trust the ingredients hiding in plain sight. And if the Romans had met the tomato, they'd probably have thrown it to the peacocks first. Roman emperors didn't just fear assassination by dagger or sword, they dreaded the silent killer lurking in every cup of wine. But some rulers, like the infamous Mithridates VI of Pontus, turned the tables on would-be poisoners by transforming their own bodies into fortresses. His method, a self-imposed regimen of microdose toxins, carefully calibrated to build immunity without tipping into lethal territory. Night after night, he consumed tiny amounts of arsenic, venom, and even deadly plants like belladonna, turning his bloodstream into a battleground where resilience was forged through sheer, reckless discipline. This wasn't just paranoia, it was a survival strategy ripped from the pages of Greek mythology. Mithridates took inspiration from legends like the warrior Achilles, dipped in the river Styx for invincibility, except his version involved gulping down cocktails of hemlock and wolfsbane. The result: by the time his enemies finally cornered him, the story goes that even suicide by poison failed. He had to order a loyal guard to run him through with a sword instead. His obsession birthed the so-called Mithridatum, a universal antidote so prized that Roman emperors like Nero and Marcus Aurelius carried it in locked vials. Recipes varied, but the most potent versions contained over 50 ingredients, from crushed scorpions to opium, mixed with wine and honey to mask the horror. Here's the twist. Modern toxicologists suspect Mithridatum was less miracle cure and more placebo. Many of its ingredients, like rhubarb or saffron, had no real antidotal properties. But the ritual itself, the daily dose, the secrecy gave rulers psychological armor. Emperors flaunted their immunity like a badge of honor, hosting banquets where they'd nonchalantly sip from the same cup as their nervous guests. The message was clear: try to poison me and you'll only make me stronger. The practice backfired spectacularly in some cases. Emperor Commodus, convinced of his invincibility, allegedly guzzled Mithridatum like tonic water, only to weaken his system so much that a common fever killed him. Others suffered chronic pain or organ damage from years of self-poisoning. Yet the myth persisted, its legacy echoing in modern medicine. Today's allergy shots and vaccines operate on the same principle: controlled exposure to build resistance. The Romans just took it to extremes, blurring the line between genius and madness. So next time you pop a flu shot, thank science but spare a thought for Mithridates, the king who bet his life on the idea that the cure for poison might just be poison itself. Roman legions didn't just march for glory, they marched for salt, the white gold that fueled their conquests and literally paid their wages. The Latin word sal gives us salary, and for good reason. Soldiers often received portions of salt as part of their pay, a substance so valuable it could be traded like coinage. But why salt? In a world without refrigeration, it was the ultimate preservative, turning perishable meat into long-lasting provisions that could feed an army on the move. A single legion might consume tons of it annually, not just for seasoning but for survival. Without salt, Rome's military machine would have ground to a halt. Salt's value extended far beyond the battlefield. It was the backbone of trade networks, with roads like the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, carrying it from the Adriatic coast deep into the empire's heart. Merchants dealt in salt blocks as currency, and towns sprang up around salt pans, their economies built on harvesting evaporated seawater. Pliny the Elder called it the most necessary substance for life, and he wasn't exaggerating. From curing fish to tanning leather, salt was the unsung hero of Roman industry. The military's salt rations weren't just practical, they were a psychological tool. Receiving a share of salt reinforced a soldier's connection to the state, a tangible reminder that Rome nourished its defenders. Some historians argue these rations were the ancient equivalent of a 401k, a benefit so essential it bound troops to their commanders. There's even evidence that disobedient soldiers were punished with salarium reductum, reduced salt rations, a penalty that hit harder than a demotion. After all, losing salt didn't just mean bland food. It meant losing the ability to preserve supplies for winter or trade for other goods. What's fascinating is how salt's legacy outlasted Rome itself. Medieval kingdoms continued using salt taxes to fund wars, and the phrase "worth his salt" endures today. Modern salaries may come in paper or digital form, but the idea traces back to legionaries hauling sacks of sal across deserts and mountains. So next time you reach for the salt shaker, remember, 2 millennia ago, that humble mineral built empires and paid the men who fought for them. Long before glass-fronted department stores or food courts, Rome's Trajan's market redefined commerce with a design so ahead of its time, it wouldn't look out of place in a 21st century downtown. This sprawling complex, built into the slopes of Quirinal Hill around 110 AD, wasn't just a cluster of stalls, it was a meticulously planned retail utopia. 6 levels of brick-faced concrete arched over 150 shops, offices, and even apartments, all connected by ramps and staircases that mimicked the flow of a modern shopping center. Imagine walking past bakeries scenting the air with fresh bread, spice merchants displaying saffron from Persia, and wine vendors offering samples all under one roof. This wasn't commerce, it was theater. The genius of Trajan's market lay in its details. Barrel-vaulted ceilings absorbed the clamor of crowds, while strategically placed windows funneled sunlight onto merchandise without scorching delicate fabrics or oils. Upper floors housed administrative offices where contracts were signed, proving Romans understood the value of mixing retail with back-end operations. But the real marvel, the market's integration with Trajan's forum next door. Senators and shoppers rubbed shoulders, turning commerce into a social spectacle. Wealthy patrons could browse imported silks, then stroll over to the forum to debate politics, an ancient version of grabbing a coffee after hitting the mall. What set this apart from chaotic open-air markets was its innovation in crowd control. Vendors were organized by trade, much like today's boutique sections, with strict zoning to prevent fishmongers from overwhelming perfume sellers. Archaeologists have found evidence of a standardized pricing system, suggesting haggling wasn't the norm here. Instead, prices were likely displayed on plaques, a radical shift toward transparency. There were even heated rooms for luxury goods, proving climate-controlled retail isn't a modern invention. The market's legacy outlasted Rome itself. Medieval bazaars borrowed its vertical layout, and Renaissance architects studied its curves. But perhaps its most enduring feature was psychological. By making shopping an experience rather than a chore, Trajan's market turned commerce into culture. Next time you lose an afternoon wandering a mall, remember, you're walking in the footsteps of Romans who turned spending money into an art form 2,000 years ago. If you think fast food is a modern invention, the ancient Romans would happily prove you wrong with a steaming cup of spiced wine in one hand and a bowl of lentil stew in the other. Meet the Thermopolium, Rome's answer to the quick-service restaurant, where hungry citizens could grab a hot meal without ever stepping into a kitchen. These bustling street stalls lined every major road, their counters embedded with large clay pots called dolia, keeping dishes bubbling over charcoal fires from dawn till dusk. Picture a Roman version of a food truck park, where workers, merchants, and even wealthy elites rubbed elbows over bowls of spicy garum-laced stews and freshly baked flatbreads. The real proof of their popularity, Pompeii's ruins preserved them like snapshots of daily life. Archaeologists have uncovered nearly 80 thermopolia in the city alone, some with carbonized remnants of their last meals still clinging to the pots. One particularly well-preserved stall in Reggio 5 still had traces of duck, goat, and fish stew, proof that Roman fast food wasn't just hearty but surprisingly diverse. Analysis of the residues revealed ingredients like cumin, fennel, and even traces of crushed snails, suggesting these weren't cheap slop but carefully seasoned dishes. And let's not forget the drinks, hot mulsum honeyed wine spiked with pepper or posca, a vinegary wine mix beloved by soldiers and laborers alike. What's fascinating is how these spots doubled as social hubs. Unlike modern drive-thrus, thermopolia were places to linger. Counters often featured colorful frescoes of the menu, a grinning god holding a jug of wine or a platter of figs, turning mealtime into a visual experience. Some even had built-in gambling boards, inviting patrons to roll dice between bites. And here's the kicker, many Romans didn't have kitchens at home. Apartments in Insulae, the cramped multi-story tenements, often lacked cooking spaces, making these stalls a necessity rather than a luxury. The Thermopolium's legacy is everywhere once you know to look. The concept of street food as equalizer, Rome nailed it 2,000 years ago. The obsession with convenience, they perfected it. Even the idea of a daily special has roots here. Some stalls offer discounts at certain hours to move inventory. So next time you grab a slice of pizza on the go, tip your hat to the Thermopolium. The Romans didn't just invent fast food, they turned it into a way of life. Roman doctors didn't just stop at pigeon dung and lead laced face creams, they turned to the sea for one of their most bizarre remedies, lobster blood. If you thought ancient medicine couldn't get any stranger, imagine being handed a cup of crustacean hemoglobin to cure your kidney stones. Physicians like Galen swore by it, prescribing the dark, briny liquid as a cure for everything from urinary infections to stubborn fevers. The process was as gruesome as it sounds. Live lobsters were crushed or soaked in vinegar to extract their blood, which was then mixed with honey or wine to mask the metallic tang. Patients would gag it down, convinced this oceanic elixir held miraculous powers. But why lobster blood? Romans believed creatures of the sea carried concentrated vitality, their fluids brimming with life force. The deep blue color of lobster hemolymph, closer to blue-green than red, only added to its mystique, making it seem otherworldly compared to human blood. Some doctors claimed it could cool inflamed organs, while others thought its saltiness mirrored the body's own fluids, restoring balance. Never mind that consuming it likely made symptoms worse. For some, the placebo effect was strong enough to keep the practice alive for centuries. This wasn't even the oddest ingredient in a Roman apothecary. Scribonius Largus, physician to Emperor Claudius, once recommended a paste of crushed millipedes for earaches, while Pliny the Elder suggested rubbing ashes from burned vipers onto bald spots. The logic: if a creature survived harsh conditions, its essence could transfer that resilience to humans. Lobsters, able to regenerate limbs, were seen as walking pharmacies. Never mind that their blood contains copper-based hemocyanin, which is useless for human biology. Roman medicine was equal parts observation, superstition, and desperate guesswork. The legacy of lobster blood reveals a deeper truth about Roman healthcare. It thrived on shock value and spectacle. Wealthy patrons paid top coin for exotic treatments, turning medicine into a status symbol. A cure wasn't just effective, it had to be extravagant. So while peasant families relied on herbal poultices, elites flaunted their access to dolphin bile or crocodile dung, each more outrageous than the last. Modern science has since debunked most of these remedies, but the instinct behind them lingers. Today's wellness industry still peddles shark cartilage and jellyfish collagen, proving some obsessions never die. The Romans just set the bar for audacity. After all, crushing a lobster for its blood takes a special kind of commitment. Next time you pass a seafood tank, remember, 2,000 years ago, those creatures weren't just dinner. They were walking, pinching pharmacies. Commodus didn't just watch gladiator battles, he fought in them, but with a twist so shameless it would make even reality TV producers blush. This wasn't some noble emperor testing his mettle. It was a carefully staged spectacle where the rules were rewritten to ensure one outcome: Commodus always won. Dressed in the lion skin cloak of Hercules, a deity he claimed to be incarnate, he'd stride into the Colosseum to face opponents who were either disarmed, intoxicated, or outright paid to take a dive. The crowds knew the fights were rigged, but protesting meant death, so they cheered as Commodus heroically slaughtered disabled animals and butchered gladiators who'd been given wooden swords. His ego didn't stop at the arena. He renamed Rome itself Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus, and had statues erected depicting him as the literal founder of a new era. The depth of his delusion was staggering. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio describe how Commodus would charge the Roman treasury 1,000,000 sesterces per appearance, billing the state for his own vanity performances. He even invented ludicrous titles for himself, like Conqueror of 1,000 Gladiators, despite never facing a real fight. On days when he felt particularly theatrical, he'd reenact myths, playing both hero and executioner. In one infamous display, he decapitated an ostrich and paraded its head before senators, grinning as they struggled to hide their terror, a not-so-subtle hint about their own fates if they displeased him. But here's the kicker: Commodus wasn't untalented. He'd trained since childhood with professional gladiators, and his skill with a bow was genuine. Yet instead of honing those abilities, he wasted them on cruelty and pageantry. His reign turned the Colosseum into a personal playground where politics blended with bloodsport. Senators were forced to attend, not as dignitaries but as captive audience members, clapping as their emperor hacked at elephants or posed with the head of a giraffe like some grotesque trophy. The message was clear: Rome wasn't a republic anymore. It was Commodus's fanfiction, and everyone else were just extras. The final insult: he demanded worship as a living god, insisting priests sacrifice red-haired slaves to honor him. When fire damaged the Temple of Peace, he spun it as divine wrath against those who doubted his divinity. By the time his inner circle had enough, strangling him in his bath, the empire was bankrupt both financially and morally. Commodus didn't just cheapen the gladiatorial games, he exposed how easily power, unchecked by reality, spirals into madness. The Colosseum had seen plenty of spectacles, but none so pitiful as an emperor playing warrior while Rome burned. Long before Christmas trees or jingling bells, Rome was already throwing the ultimate December bash, Saturnalia. This week-long festival honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture and time, turned society upside down in ways that would feel eerily familiar today. Imagine streets packed with revelers exchanging gifts like candles, dice, and tiny figurines, the ancient equivalent of last-minute Amazon orders. Masters served meals to their enslaved people. Gambling was temporarily legalized, and everyone wore the red felt pileus cap, symbolizing freedom from social rules. It was chaos, but a carefully controlled chaos, where the usual hierarchies dissolved just long enough to let off steam before snapping back into place. The parallels to modern Christmas are downright uncanny. Romans strung garlands of greenery, feasted on roast pork and honey cakes, and even had their own version of caroling, rowdy processions where crowds shouted "Io Saturnalia." Instead of jingle bells, gift-giving carried the same mix of obligation and delight. Martial's poems complain about cheap trinkets from stingy patrons, proving some holiday frustrations are truly timeless. But the wildest tradition, electing a king of Saturnalia, usually a low-status person chosen to lead the festivities. For a few days, this mock ruler could make outrageous demands like demanding guests dance naked or recite poetry, while everyone played along. Think of it as ancient office holiday party meets Game of Thrones. Early Christians didn't just disapprove of Saturnalia, they outright hijacked it. By the 4th century, church leaders strategically placed Christmas on December 25th, overlapping with the pagan festival's finale. The rebranding was genius: keep the feasting and gift exchanges but swap Saturn for Jesus. Even the timing was pragmatic. Saturnalia's focus on light bonfires, candles dovetailed perfectly with Christmas's symbolism of Christ as the light of the world. Some traditions proved harder to sanctify. The drunken revelry and role reversals were gradually toned down, though echoes lingered. Medieval lords still served servants during Lord of Misrule celebrations, and the Puritans' hatred of Christmas stemmed partly from its raucous Saturnalian roots. What's fascinating is how Saturnalia's spirit survives in subtle ways. White elephant gift exchanges, that's the Roman love of absurdity. Office parties where the intern gets to roast the CEO. A watered-down king of Saturnalia. Even the pressure to splurge on gifts traces back to ancient social obligations. The festival's legacy is a testament to Rome's cultural endurance, proof that even when a holiday's name changes, its DNA lingers. So next time you stress over holiday shopping, blame the Romans. They invented the messy, magical, deeply human chaos of December 2,000 years ago, and we've been recycling their party ever since. The toga might be the first thing that comes to mind when picturing Roman fashion, but the real wardrobe staple for everyday people was the tunica, a garment so practical it wouldn't look out of place in a modern streetwear collection. Think of it as the ancient ancestor of the crop top, a simple, knee-length tunic made from rough wool or linen, cinched at the waist with a belt. While senators wrapped themselves in cumbersome togas that required teams of slaves to arrange properly, laborers, soldiers, and even lower-class citizens lived in their tunics, which allowed for freedom of movement whether they were tilling fields or marching into battle. What made the tunica such a bold fashion statement wasn't just its convenience, it was a walking billboard for social status. The shorter the tunic, the harder the work it signaled. Farmers and dockworkers wore theirs above the knee to avoid tripping or snagging fabric, while wealthy youths flirted with scandal by hiking theirs even higher, showing off-toned legs as a flex of leisure. Soldiers took it further, pairing ultra-short tunics with sturdy sandals and gleaming armor, creating a look that balanced practicality with intimidation. There's even evidence that gladiators adapted the style, their tunics slashed at the sides for maximum mobility in the arena. But here's where it gets fascinating. The tunica wasn't just about function. Dyes told their own stories. The classic undyed off-white marked a laborer, while a splash of red or purple at the edges hinted at military rank or minor nobility. Senators might have scoffed at the simplicity of the tunica, but they weren't above wearing a longer, finer version beneath their togas, a silent admission that even the elite needed comfort sometimes. The real power of the tunica lay in its versatility. Unlike the toga, which demanded ceremony, this was a garment for doing things. Archaeologists have found tunics with reinforced stitching at stress points, proof that Romans engineered their clothing for durability. Some versions even had detachable sleeves, making them adaptable to weather or work conditions. And while the toga faded into obscurity with the empire's fall, the tunica evolved, morphing into the tunics of medieval Europe and eventually influencing everything from monks' robes to modern athletic wear. So next time you throw on a t-shirt or cropped hoodie, remember, you're channeling a 2,000-year-old tradition of fashion meets function. The Romans didn't just invent roads and aqueducts, they pioneered the art of looking good while getting things done. And if that's not a legacy worth celebrating, what is? Romans didn't just roll dice for fun, they turned animal bones into an entire strategy game that would put modern board game nights to shame. Meet ludus latrunculorum, the chess-like pastime played with sheep or goat knucklebones, where military tactics collided with pure chance. Picture a grid scratched into stone or dirt, players hunched over their pieces smooth, polished bones repurposed as pawns plotting moves to capture opponents' tokens by flanking them. But here's the twist, the game wasn't just about skill. Romans often played for high stakes, wagering coins, wine, or even favors in matches that could last hours. Gambling was so woven into Roman culture that even soldiers carried knucklebones in their kits, passing time between battles with makeshift boards. Emperor Augustus famously loved the game, though he preferred watching others play while he strategized from the sidelines. The bones themselves weren't just markers, they were believed to carry luck. Some players ritually rubbed them before a match, whispering prayers to Fortuna, the goddess of chance. Archaeologists have found loaded knucklebones with weighted cores, proving cheating was as old as the games themselves. What made ludus latrunculorum unique was its blend of brute simplicity and deep strategy. Unlike modern chess with its specialized pieces, this was a democratized battle. Any bone could become a general with the right maneuver, yet the gambling aspect turned every match into theater. Taverns hosted raucous tournaments where spectators bet on players, and losers might stagger away not just defeated but penniless. The poet Martial wrote about a man who gambled away his entire inheritance in one ill-fated game, a cautionary tale that didn't stop others from risking it all. The game's legacy lingers in unexpected places. The phrase, rolling the bones for taking chances, pure Roman. Even kids' games like jacks descend from knucklebone tosses. But perhaps the most Roman detail of all was how they blurred the line between play and peril. To roll those bones wasn't just a pastime, it was a microcosm of an empire built on audacity, where every move could lead to ruin or glory. And isn't that the thrill of any great game? In the grand tapestry of Roman conflicts, few wars began as absurdly or as revealingly as the one ignited by a single insult about hair. Picture this: 5th century BCE, a Roman envoy named Marcus Furius arrives in the territory of the Senons, a Germanic tribe led by the imposing chieftain Brennus. What should have been a routine negotiation over land rights turned explosive when Furius, unable to hide his disdain, sneered at Brennus's waist-length hair, calling it barbaric and unfit for a true leader. To the Senons, hair wasn't just personal style, it was sacred, a mark of warrior status and divine favor. Brennus's response: he grabbed a fistful of his own locks and snarled, "Then let Rome learn the price of mocking what it does not understand." Within weeks, his warriors were marching south, burning villages and demanding vengeance for the insult. This wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a collision of cultures. To Romans, short hair symbolized discipline and civilization, a rejection of the wild aesthetics of outsiders. Germanic tribes, meanwhile, saw their flowing locks as spiritual armor. Cutting it was akin to surrender. The Senons' fury wasn't just about pride, it was a defense of identity against a rising power that dismissed their traditions as backward. The conflict, later dubbed the War of the Hair, culminated in the infamous sack of Rome in 390 BCE, where Brennus's forces breached the city walls and demanded a ransom of 1,000 pounds of gold. When Roman officials protested the weight, legend claims Brennus tossed his sword onto the scales and growled, "Woe to the vanquished." The irony: Rome eventually adopted elements of the very culture it ridiculed. Later emperors like Trajan and Hadrian grew beards in homage to Greek and Germanic styles, signaling a shift from rigid tradition to pragmatic assimilation. The war over a haircut became a cautionary tale, proof that underrating another's customs could cost an empire more than gold. It's a lesson that echoes through history. Sometimes the smallest slight carries the heaviest consequences. Beneath the pristine marble floors of Roman villas lay a dark and bizarre secret: rows of tiny skeletons buried with deliberate care, their bones arranged to face the threshold. These weren't sacrifices in the traditional sense, but something far stranger: puppy guardians interred beneath homes and shops to shield against supernatural threats. Known as foundation sacrifices, this practice hinged on the belief that dogs, loyal in life, would serve as eternal sentinels in death, their spirits repelling evil forces that dared cross the boundary. Archaeologists excavating Pompeii's ruins have uncovered dozens of these grim deposits, particularly beneath bakeries and workshops, where the stakes for prosperity and supernatural protection were highest. The logic behind the ritual reveals a chilling blend of practicality and superstition. Romans saw puppies as liminal creatures, neither fully wild nor fully tamed, making them ideal mediators between the human world and the unseen. Their whimpers and barks were thought to alert the living to spirits, so burying them at entry points turned their very remains into an alarm system for the afterlife. Some puppies were placed with coins in their mouths, a nod to Charon's fee for ferrying souls across the Styx, ensuring they could complete their spectral duty. Others were found with pottery shards arranged around them, possibly to amplify their protective power like a macabre charm. What's especially haunting is the evidence of ritual precision. At a bakery in Herculaneum, a pup was buried beneath the millstone, its spine carefully aligned with the grinding pivot, a symbolic fusion of commerce and mysticism. The message was clear: this business wouldn't just survive earthly competition, it was fortified against curses and envious demons. Even more unsettling are the accounts of live interments, though forensic evidence suggests most puppies were already dead when placed, often killed humanely with a single blow to avoid angering their spirits. The practice wasn't limited to commoners. Elite homes in Austria featured mosaic floors with embedded dog motifs, their glass tile eyes forever watchful. Pliny the Younger wrote of a neighbor who refused to renovate without consulting a haruspex to confirm the placement of new foundation sacrifices, proving even the educated elite hedged their bets with the supernatural. Modern parallels linger in unexpected places. Ever wonder why we say, "Let sleeping dogs lie"? The phrase might trace back to these Roman beliefs disturbing a guardian spirit invited disaster. And while we no longer bury pets under our floorboards, the instinct to protect our spaces endures, whether through horseshoes hung on doors or the lingering superstition of breaking mirrors. The Romans just took it to the literal extreme, turning their most loyal companions into eternal protectors, one tiny skeleton at a time. Here's a historical myth that just won't die: the infamous vomitorium, those supposed rooms where Romans allegedly gorged on feasts, then purged to make room for more. It's a grotesque image that's been repeated everywhere from history books to TV shows, but here's the shocking truth: the vomitorium had nothing to do with vomiting. The word actually comes from the Latin vomere, meaning to spew forth, but Romans weren't talking about food. They were describing the way crowds poured out of amphitheaters through these massive exit passages. Picture a stadium disgorging thousands of spectators in minutes, like water rushing through a sluice gate. That's the real vomitorium, an engineering marvel, not a bulimic's retreat. So how did this mix-up happen? Blame Victorian historians with a flair for moralizing. When 19th century scholars first stumbled across the term, they latched onto the modern similarity to vomit and, without much evidence, spun it into a cautionary tale about Roman decadence. The idea fit neatly into their narrative of a fallen empire corrupted by excess, and soon the myth took on a life of its own. Never mind that ancient sources never mention vomiting as a dining practice. Never mind that Roman medical texts actually warned against forced purging as dangerous. The sensational version was simply too juicy to fact-check. The reality was far less dramatic, but no less impressive. Vomitoria were vital to Rome's crowd control. The Colosseum had 80 of them, sloped corridors designed to funnel 50,000 people in and out with military efficiency. Architects prioritized flow, with steps spaced to match human stride and exits positioned to prevent bottlenecks. This wasn't just convenience, it was survival. In a city where riots could spark over something as small as a missed bread shipment, moving masses smoothly wasn't just smart, it was political. Yet the myth persists, perhaps because it speaks to our fascination with Roman excess. We want to believe in a world where emperors feasted on flamingo tongues, then casually purged to indulge further. It's a titillating contrast to modern table manners. But archaeology doesn't lie. Excavations of villas and banquet halls have yet to uncover a single room dedicated to post-meal purging. Even Rome's most notorious gluttons, like Vitellius or Elagabalus, were criticized for how much they ate, never for making themselves vomit to eat more. The irony: Romans did have methods for mitigating overindulgence, they just weren't so crude. Wealthy diners might sip mint-infused wines to soothe digestion or recline on couches to ease stomach pressure. Some favored digestive walks between courses, a practice still recommended today. But the vomitorium myth overshadows these nuances, reducing a sophisticated culture to a caricature of mindless excess. So next time you hear someone joke about Roman vomitoriums, set the record straight. Those passages weren't for losing your lunch, they were for losing the crowd. And honestly, that's far more impressive. Managing thousands of rowdy spectators without a single security camera, now that's a feat worthy of an empire. From pigeon dung hair dye to ghost-haunted mills, ancient Rome was a civilization where reality constantly outdid imagination. Who could forget the gladiators guzzling ash smoothies for strength, or the senators forced to bow to Emperor Caligula's horse? And let's not even get started on the molar spirits. Phantom laborers eternally trapped in the grind of flour mills, their groans echoing through the night. These weren't just oddities, they were threads in the fabric of daily life, revealing a society as flawed, creative, and unabashedly human as our own. There's something oddly comforting about Rome's bizarre quirks. Their obsession with Tyrian purple, a dye so rare it cost thousands of snails' lives, mirrors our own modern luxury cravings. Their fear of new foods, like the dreaded wolf peach tomato, feels eerily familiar in an age of avocado toast skeptics and sushi doubters. Even their public toilets, where socializing trumped privacy, might make you rethink your next bathroom stall scroll session. These weren't marble statues frozen in time. They were people who laughed, gambled, and occasionally stuffed dormice with minced pork because, well, why not? So now it's your turn. Which fact left you utterly stunned? Was it the snail-blooded Tyrian purple flecks, or the unspeakable horror of communal sponge sticks? Drop your pick in the comments. We dare you to top the weirdness. And if you're craving more historical absurdities, because let's face it, Rome's just the tip of the bizarre iceberg, hit that subscribe button. Trust us, history's got way more surprises where these came from, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Until then, keep questioning, keep laughing, and maybe, just maybe, skip the pigeon-based beauty treatments. Some things are better left in the past.